Fans of the cardboard, welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. Today, I've got another video for you. I have to urinate like crazy, so we're going to blast through this so I can get to a toilet. But yeah, I want to talk about trap cards because I think the trap cards have been actually falling into a very particular slot in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Metagame as of late. I would say over the last 5-ish years, we've seen trap cards just slowly get worse and worse and worse as the game gets faster and more powerful with each new core set, or just each new set pretty much. The game gets faster, and that makes cards like traps that you have to set, you have to wait a turn, inherently worse and worse. But we're kind of in a format where people are side decking trap cards way more often, and even some interesting main deck techs as well are coming to fruition, which is pretty spicy. We're going to look at a bunch of the ones that I've noticed that are happening in the metagame as of late. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Just want to have a general discussion about traps. I want to hear your guys' thoughts though down below, whether it's trap decks. I mean, we saw Altergeist top. I know that was a Mystic Mind deck, but still, it's a trap deck. In the form of Altergeist, which is pretty cool. But other than that, we only see trap decks top here or there. So I want to hear your guys' thoughts just on trap decks as well as just trap tech cards in general. Whether it's side deck, main deck, whatever. Want to hear your thoughts down below on that. So let's get into this thing. Talking about the big ones, obviously Imperm. I think this card has a home in the format, is specifically if you want to play it to have a response to Sprite. I think if you're going to see only one of the weaker hand traps, so we're talking about Ash, Imperm, Veiler, that kind of stuff, you want to see Imperm in my opinion, because if Sprite has a good hand, they're always going to opt to set up red, which only stops monsters, which means that this card still negates Gigantic Sprite and keeps them off of the Frog engine if they didn't hard open a Swap Frog, which is pretty nice. Even if they had a really good hand, you can still force them into a pretty mediocre board with one impermanence. Pretty solid. From there, evenly matched. This card's always floating around side decks unless we're in a very specific, super heavy Omni Negate board, set of boards in the format. I wouldn't say we're on that right now. Tiers can end on some Omni Negate stuff, depending on the variant. And Sprites end on the one Totally Awesome, but usually it's if you can bait the first Totally Awesome, you then can potentially fire this if you have no cards on field. In which case they wouldn't have the Toad yet back again, or there's ways to sequence it, or this can bait one of the Toad negates, and you'll take that because they only have 1 or 2 negates off Toad at best, depending on what your hand looks like, and you can go from there. So I think it's a pretty powerful card, not a ton of negation, hard negation in the format, so yeah, I think this works. Next up, we have the Devastation Viruses. I think most people play Eradicator, right? I don't know if most people are playing Eradicator or Deck Devi, because Deck Devi is crazy versus Sprite specifically, but Eradicator is kind of generically insane, but whatever. With the game becoming so generically able to set up so many different things, we used to look at the virus cards and be like, oh, you got to get to a big dark monster? How are you going to consistently do that? And now we just have generic Link monsters that can get you there, generic Synchro monsters, Exceed monsters, in-archetype monsters, fusions, whatever, that so many engines could just so easily get you to a big dark monster, which is so easy to complete. So these cards are complete blowouts. We're seeing these side decked as going first cards, which is really funny. I think part of it is just we're in a format now where a lot of people are playing board breakers, not even hand traps at all, and so because of that, people are more scared of or they just don't feel as confident going first, which usually in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a huge leg up because there's board breakers. There's super 1 or 2 equalizers in the hand, just completely turns off all your interruption, and then your opponent just barrels through you. So they want to have complete dominating blowout cards like these to just potentially run away with the duel immediately, and that's pretty cool. Is it cool? It's terrifying that cards like these are even being taken advantage of right now. I don't know how you're supposed to respond to this. You really can't. There's no way to beat these cards really, because they can fire them even in standby, and it's pretty brutal. But it is what it is. From there, we move to some other cards, other side decked cards. This package is interesting. You have Artifact Sanctum, obviously with the Scythe. If Scythe gets banned, then this card kind of gets loses pretty much all its lure of playing it at all for in the side deck or in another deck as an engine, whatever. That's pretty cool. A Pointer of the Red Lotus, another really broken card going first. You just get to look at your opponent's hand and rip a card out for the next, like, whatever it is, 2 or 3 turns. That's pretty powerful, especially since you get hand knowledge. So you, one, get to hit the best card in your opponent's hand. If they have a board wipe, bam, you get to hit that. If not, you just get to hit the most powerful engine card in their hand to just make their hand weaker, even in terms of the engine, which is really crazy. So definitely this card's crazy. And then, oh, I think I skipped a card. Trap Trick, sorry. Trap Trick also is coming up here for that package. I've seen people playing like 2 Artifact Sanctum, 2 a Pointer, and the 1 Trap Trick, just so that they get to pick which one they want, and they'll do it in a deck where they already play something like Imperm, so like they already have another target if need be, to kind of make it better. Trap Trick's cool. Trap Trick's one of those funny cards where like it's a trap card that kind of is better in decks that don't play a ton of traps, because it locks down the rest of your back row once you fire it. You kind of only want to see it by itself. But in an instance like this where you're side decking in a non-trap deck, you're looking for very specific, insane haymaker trap cards that can just give you an insane leg up on your opponent for that duel. Anti-spell, this one's not as popular right now just because the 2 best decks are Sprite and Tier. Sprite plays a couple spells, but like they are monster heavy for the most part in a lot of instances. I mean, I guess with like more board breakers, they do play more spells, but if we get to a point where Sprites are playing a lot of hand traps again, this card becomes way worse, obviously. So, you know, pretty crazy. And then Tiers don't play a ton of spells, just most of their like power spells mostly. And then we get to more Floodgates. Rivalry we've seen in a handful of decks. Stuff like Mathmex can play this. We saw the Plant Link player who won European Nationals playing this. If you can play it, it's really good. Sprites want to go outside of Thunders, so just kind of locking them down into Thunders really limits what they're able to do, especially offensively. They can set up their red, they can set up their carrot, and have some negates defensively in staying in Thunders, but they cannot get very offensive at all. They can't get to Zeus that way, they can't get to many of their removal utility exceeds or link monsters, and this really puts them in a very like compromised position, in my opinion. They have outs to it, but like it is still a problem, and if you're able to negate one of their outs to it, like a Smashers, they can just straight up be like screwed for the whole duel. So, and then obviously Tier, with all the different engines they play, they're trying to go into a ton of different stuff. Even if you lock them in the Aqua, that keeps them off of like every other engine in their deck, every other like possible utility boss monster they might go into, and they honestly don't do a ton if they're locked into Aqua. So pretty nice there. Shadow Imprisoning Mirror, even this card's like pretty cool. I think it's like fine versus Sprite, right? Because Gigantic, I believe, is dark. And then also Blue and Jet can't resolve their effects on the field. All of their combos want to go through those 2 cards to just go like crazy plus with a really linear line. So even versus them, it's decent, but even more so, it's Tier, right? Field or Graveyard Dark Monsters effects are negated, so they cannot resolve Tier monster effects in the graveyard. They cannot resolve any dark effects on the field. This card is a clamp on Tier for sure. But of course, like the drawback with all of these like continuous Floodgate effect cards is that like they stay on the field. It's not just like a dimensional barrier where there's no real response. If you don't have a hard negate for it right then and there, you can't really do anything about it. It's just going to be there, and you're just going to like have to like go through that. But if you do have a card that can remove this, you can kind of just play right through it at that point. So, you know, they kind of lose to just like specific outs. We already talked about Trap Trick. Another interesting one, Terrors of the Overroot. I've seen a little bit of play on this, not a ton. I saw that, shout outs to Trell from Team APS. He was playing this card in his Punk deck, just like randomly. Just threw it in there because he wanted whatever, utility trap card, Mystic Mine out, just remove whatever one thing you need. I like this card because it's just pretty flexible. Obviously, the downside is you have to give your opponent a card, but it sets it, so if it's a spell or trap, it can't be activated that turn, especially a trap, or a quick play. They can activate spell if you set it on their turn, but ideally, you're going to give them the worst target in their grave. So I think about decks that like play some bricks or monsters with hard once per turn effects. So like setting a monster back to their field, they can't flip it up anymore. So like that's not really helping unless they're like a fusion deck to use as material. In most instances, the card you give your opponent back is not going to be very helpful. Other than that, this just says target any card and remove it from the field. And even that, even on top of that point, you could even respond to your opponent who's trying to like do something with a card engrave, and you can move that card engrave. Like if they activate a tier effect, you could literally like reset the tier, which moves it during its resolution, so it does not resolve, and send something from the field. So you could get like double damage on this card. I think it's a pretty interesting tech card. I definitely want to mess around with it in some decks for me, just because it's a Mystic Mine out. It hits anything on the field. It can potentially hinder your opponent from doing stuff in grave at the same time. It's a pretty interesting card, just with like how it kind of just stops a little bit of everything. It's not perfect, obviously not perfect, but like I still think it does a lot. From there, we have Paleozoic Dinomischus. This card comes in and out of formats, specifically when we have decks that like really love the synergy with this card. I think this could be a card where if Danger Dark World ends up being good, this could be like a utility card for them for Mystic Mine outs, for a deck that I wouldn't expect to have a ton of Mystic Mine outs. But what we're seeing right now is with Tear-Element. Really cool utility card for them because this discards as effect. It's why it could be good with Dark Worlds, but why it's particularly good right now with tiers, discarding a tier as effect to remove something, which is banishing, which is like the best form of removal in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And then triggering a Tear-Element, you're literally banishing something, then getting a fusion summon off of like this card with a tier in hand. Very, very powerful, very good, and I like this as a tech for them 100%. I don't know if people are maining it or signing it right now, but I think it's a card that plays second even decently, setting it into boards. Like I think it's a really, really like interesting card right now. And I think the last card we're going to look at today is High Rate Draw. Shout out to Pack and Nesh on their podcast. I saw they were talking about this card as a spicy tech. It's pretty interesting. I think more so it's a tier tech as well, but it says destroy 2 or more monsters you control. And if you do, draw 1 card for every 2 monsters destroyed. During your opponent's main phase, if this card is in your graveyard, you can target a monster you control, destroy it, and if you do, set this card. But banish it when it leaves the field. So, is this card amazing? Absolutely not. Absolutely, absolutely not. It says pop 2 of your own monsters to draw 1 card. The interesting part about this is, 1, in tier, you're triggering Tear-Element effects. So, like, popping your own monsters is not just a 3-for-1, right? If you're popping 2 tier monsters, you could literally be going, like, plus in that scenario, right? Fusion summon into a Kick Callus on your opponent's turn, send 3 more, get another fusion summon, and, like, you're going off and off, right? So it's not a terrible thing. The other thing, though, is the utility of, 1, dodging certain things that are trying to, like, remove your monsters on the field or negate them anyway, or Mystic Mine. This gives you a way to clear your own monsters off your field so that a Mystic Mine will destroy itself on the end phase. Bottom line, players are just looking for like more smooth ways to have Mystic Mine outs via like more engine stuff. I know this isn't like a searchable card, but like it's a card that's getting you resources instead of like, oh, it's just a cosmic, a card that it literally says nothing but like hate on Mystic Mine. It could have some other utilities, but generally a lot of decks aren't playing a ton of back row. So like a card like that is a little more pigeonholed, whereas this card is just getting you to more of your engine by drawing you cards. And also sending your tiers, if you have it, to trigger more fusion effects and like go off from there. So it's a really interesting card. It still feels pretty minus. It still feels like it could just be really awful in certain scenarios. But if you are expecting to play a Mystic Mine, like somebody you know is playing 3 Mystic Mine in the main and ways to search it, post side, this could be a really interesting card to like kind of keep your deck ready to handle a deck heavy on Mystic Mine. So we'll see. Some of this stuff will change. If a ban list comes out and Mystic Mine gets banned, obviously some of the stuff we talked about probably gets moved around here and stops seeing play. I don't think the Dinomischus will see play. I don't think the High Rate Draw will continue to see play if stuff like that comes. I mean, maybe there are still some Floodgates that like Dinomischus would be cool against, but High Rate Draw, specifically its best function is like avoiding Mystic Mine. But I don't know. Really interesting stuff, though, all around. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. Are there any other trap cards that are kind of being teched around in the format? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that, and if you think they're good or not. I definitely want to know what you guys are thinking. But I'm out of here for today. Just want to have a general discussion about traps because they're my favorite cards in the game. But I'm out of here. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't yet and you want to see more stuff from your boy down the line. Follow me on Twitter if you have not yet. And I'll see you in the next video.